In my line of work, numbers don't have emotions and copper wires don't tell lies. If a circuit is overloaded, the breaker trips. If there's a high resistance, things get hot. It's a world of cause and effect, simple, logical, and cold. My name is Rodger, and I've spent 20 years as a master electrician specializing in industrial automation and high-end residential systems. I see a house not as a collection of rooms, but as a living organism of currents and loads. My wife, Charlotte, always called me obsessive because I can tell which burner on the stove is on just by glancing at the digital readout on our main panel in the garage. She'd laugh, calling it my superpower, while she sipped her expensive Chardonnay. I thought we had a balanced system. I provided the high-voltage lifestyle, and she provided the aesthetic. But lately, the harmonics in our marriage fell off. I started noticing things that didn't add up on the grid. This isn't one of those typical cheating stories where the husband finds a stray earring or smells a different cologne. No, I found my cheating wife through a discrepancy in kilowatt hours. You see, I recently installed a sophisticated power monitoring system. It's a hobby of mine, optimizing efficiency. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'm out on the coast supervising the electrical fit-out for a new hotel chain. I leave at 6 a.m. and don't get back until late. Charlotte, supposedly, is at her boutique gallery or her yoga sessions. But the data on my tablet told a different story. According to the smart meter, at 2 p.m. every Tuesday, the central AC unit in the master suite kicks down to 68 degrees. 10 minutes later, the water heater spikes. Someone is taking a long, high-pressure shower. Then the kicker, the espresso machine. It's a pro-grade Italian model that draws a massive amount of power to heat the boiler. On those days, it cycles twice, back-to-back. One latte for a cheating wife, and one for a guest who wasn't invited by the guy paying the electric bill. "Rodger, you're home early," Charlotte said last Friday, her voice as smooth as a stabilized power supply. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than a high-end transformer. "Job finished ahead of schedule," I replied, tossing my tool belt onto the workbench. I watched her eyes. They flickered to the hallway for a millisecond. A minor surge in her nervous system. "By the way, did you have the AC checked? The compressor seems to be cycling more than usual on Tuesdays." "Oh, you and your gadgets," she laughed dismissively. "Maybe it's just the afternoon sun. I've been having Philip and Brenda over for lunch occasionally. You know how Brenda loves her iced lattes." I smiled. Philip and Brenda. A nice, grounded explanation. Except Brenda is lactose intolerant and hates espresso, and Philip has been in Florida for 3 weeks. I didn't correct her. In my trade, if you find a short circuit, you don't just grab the wire with your bare hands. You isolate the section, test the voltage, and prepare the bypass. A few days later, I was adjusting the perimeter lighting. I've always been proud of our outdoor setup, motion sensors that track every movement from the gate to the porch. Charlotte had recently complained that the lights were too sensitive and annoying the neighbors, so she asked me to disable them. I told her I did. What I actually did was disable the lights, but I kept the sensors active. They now sent silent notifications to my workstation in the garage. No flashes, no noise. Just a log of every time a mass larger than 50 kilograms entered the driveway. That Thursday, while I was sitting in my truck 3 miles away, my tablet buzzed. 1:45 p.m., motion detected at driveway zone 1. 5 minutes later, zone 4, side entrance. I pulled up my maintenance feed. I had installed a high-definition dashcam inside a dummy electrical junction box on a utility pole across the street, powered directly from the line. It wasn't spy gear. It was a neighborhood watch initiative I'd told the HOA about. A white work van pulled in. No company logo, just a plain, beat-up Ford. Out stepped a man in his late 30s, wearing a tight t-shirt and a tool belt that looked suspiciously clean. This was Walt. Charlotte had mentioned him briefly, a handyman she'd hired to fix the garden lighting and the deck. I watched him walk to the side door. He didn't knock. He didn't check the broken lights. He just walked in. I looked at the power consumption on my screen. The master bedroom AC kicked on. The water heater started humming. I felt a cold, logical clarity wash over me. My marriage wasn't just failing, it was being subsidized by my own hard work. Every repair bill Charlotte had been showing me from Walt's Contracting was a payment for my own replacement. I leaned back in the driver's seat of my truck and pulled up our joint savings account on my phone. Another leak detected. $5,000 moved to her personal account for home improvements last month. "Well, Walt," I whispered to the empty cabin, a small, sarcastic smirk forming on my lips. "I hope you're enjoying the AC." Because I'm about to turn the heat up, and you're not going to like the utility bill. I didn't rush home. I didn't call her screaming. I simply opened my notes and started a new spreadsheet. I labeled it, Project Ground Fault. The next morning, I watched Charlotte across the breakfast island. She was glowing, a stark contrast to the dark circles under my eyes that I masked with a third cup of black coffee. She was scrolling through a luxury travel blog on her iPad, her fingers hovering over a villa in Santorini. "Rodger, darling," she said without looking up. "Walt mentioned that the wiring in the basement is ancient. He says it's a fire hazard. We really should have him replace the whole subpanel while he's here working on the patio." I nearly choked on my coffee. Walt, the man who wore a tool belt like a fashion accessory, wanted to touch my subpanel. That's like a street magician offering to perform open-heart surgery on a cardiologist. "The basement wiring is 12-gauge copper in armored conduit, Charlotte," I said, my voice steady and dry. "It could survive a solar flare. But if Walt thinks it's ancient, I'd love to see his diagnostic report. Did he use a multimeter, or just his intuition?" She stiffened, just for a fraction of a second. "He's the expert, Rodger. He said the insulation is cracking. It's $4,500 for the labor and materials. I already told him we'd probably go ahead with it. Safety first, right?" "Right. Safety first," I echoed. I knew exactly what that $4,500 was. It was a down payment on that Santorini trip, or perhaps a bonus for his extracurricular services in our master bedroom. I waited until she left for her gallery opening, which my GPS tracker on her car showed was actually a boutique hotel downtown, and then I went to work. I didn't go to the basement. I went to the garage. I opened the main distribution board. In a house of this size, the electrical system is divided into zones. I had designed it so I could isolate any room with a flick of a switch. But I didn't want her to know I was watching. I wanted her to feel the system failing. I installed a series of smart relays behind the walls, professional-grade equipment, not the cheap stuff you find at a hardware store. These relays allowed me to introduce phantom loads and intermittent interruptions. I programmed them to trigger specifically when the power draw reached a certain threshold, the kind of threshold generated when two people are in the house, running the AC, the shower, and the espresso machine simultaneously. Then, I turned my attention to the repairs Walt had supposedly been doing. I walked out to the patio. The new wiring he had supposedly installed for the garden lights was a joke. He'd used indoor-rated extension cords buried an inch under the dirt. It wasn't just incompetent, it was dangerous. But to an untrained eye like Charlotte's, it looked like work. I took high-resolution photos of the work. I also found a discarded receipt in the outdoor trash bin. It was for a high-end miter saw and set of titanium drill bits purchased on our joint credit card. I checked the garage. The tools weren't there. Walt was using my money to kit out his own van. "You're a real piece of work, Walt," I muttered, snapping a photo of the receipt. "Using the husband's dime to buy the tools you used to rob him. There's a certain poetic symmetry to it. Too bad you didn't account for the resistance." I spent the afternoon at the office of my longtime friend and lawyer, Philip. He wasn't the aggressive type you see in movies. He was a tax and property specialist. He looked over the bank statements and the photos of the fraudulent repairs I'd compiled. "She's siphoning Rodger," Philip said, tapping his pen against a stack of invoices from Walt's Contracting. "She's been overpaying this guy by 300% for months. And this subpanel quote? It's a total fabrication. If you can prove they're split billing and kickbacking that money into her private account, we're not just talking about a messy divorce. We're talking about felony fraud." "I don't want her in jail, Philip," I said, leaning back. "I just want her out of my circuit. I want the house, I want the retirement accounts, and I want her to leave with exactly what she brought into this, which was a suitcase and a mountain of student debt that I paid off in year 2. "It's a bold move," Philip warned, "but we need more than just suspicious power bills. We need a paper trail that connects her intent to his theft." "Don't worry," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "I'm an electrician. I know exactly how to trace a leak. I'm going to make the cost of staying in this house so high, she'll be begging to disconnect." That evening, I returned home and found Charlotte in the kitchen. She looked agitated. "Rodger, the microwave kept tripping the breaker today," she complained. "And the lights in the guest room were flickering. I think Walt was right. The house is falling apart." "Is that so?" I asked, walking over to the panel. I made a show of inspecting the breakers. Maybe the system is just overwhelmed. Too much unauthorized activity. "Don't worry, honey. I'll spend the weekend doing a full diagnostic. Tell Walt he can take a few days off. I'll handle the high-voltage stuff myself." As I walked away, I saw her quickly pull out her phone to text him. My tablet, synced to the home's router, intercepted the outgoing signal. "Charlotte, Rodger is poking around the wiring. Don't come over tomorrow. He's acting weird. Walt, relax. He's just a glorified repairman. He doesn't suspect a thing. See you Monday when he's back at the hotel site." I smiled. The arrogance of a man who doesn't understand how a circuit works is his greatest weakness. He thought I was just a repairman. He didn't realize I was the one who controlled the light, the heat, and the exit. Monday arrived with the predictable precision of a clock signal. I made a grand show of packing my gear into the truck, complaining loudly about a catastrophic transformer failure at the hotel site that would keep me busy until at least midnight. Charlotte kissed me on the cheek, her expression a mask of dutiful concern. "Don't work too hard, darling," she said, her eyes already drifting toward the window, checking for the white van. "I won't," I replied. "I'm just going to ensure everything is properly grounded." I drove 2 blocks away, parked in a neighbor's driveway, a friend who was away on vacation, and pulled out my FLIR thermal imaging camera. This wasn't a toy. It was a $10,000 piece of industrial equipment used to detect heat signatures through walls and floors. By 10:15 a.m., Walt's van rolled into my driveway. I watched through the maintenance dashcam as he entered through the side door. 10 minutes later, I saw the power draw on my tablet spike. The guest wing AC was humming. I waited an hour. Then I walked back to my own house, staying in the blind spots of the windows I knew were open. I didn't enter. I went to the external wall of the guest bedroom. I pulled out the thermal camera and aimed it at the siding. The image on the screen was glowing. I could see the heat rising from the interior. But it wasn't just the ambient temperature. I adjusted the sensitivity, focusing on the large California king mattress against the far wall. Through the insulation and the drywall, the camera picked up 2 distinct, bright orange blobs. Human heat signatures. They were sitting up, close together. The screen showed a vivid map of their betrayal, a thermal record of exactly where they had been lying. I took screenshot. It was a beautiful, haunting image of infrared infidelity. It wasn't a grainy photo of a kiss. It was scientific proof of 2 warm bodies occupying a space that should have been empty. I moved to the kitchen window, shielded by the overgrown hydrangea. I could hear them. "He's so oblivious," Walt's voice boomed. He sounded like a man who enjoyed the sound of his own lies. "He spends all day staring at wires, and he can't see what's right in front of him." "He sees what he wants to see, Walt," Charlotte replied, her voice lacking the warmth she usually reserved for me. "He's a technician. He likes things that can be fixed with a screwdriver. He doesn't understand complexity." "I understand billing," Walt laughed. "That $4,500 for the sub-panel, how much of that is going toward the Santorini fund?" $3,000, she whispered. "The rest is for your consultation fee. Just make sure you actually buy some copper wire, so it looks like you did something." I felt a surge of cold anger, but I didn't let it trip my internal breaker. I was an engineer. I needed to document the leak before I sealed it. I headed back to the garage, the one place they never went because it smelled like grease and ozone. I reached behind the main rack and pulled out an old, professional-grade acoustic leak detector. Usually, I use this to find the hum of a failing transformer behind a concrete wall. Today, I pressed the sensor against the drywall shared with the guest suite. Through the headphones, their conversation became crystal clear. The sensor didn't record audio in the traditional sense. It captured the vibrations of their voices hitting the wall and converted them into sound. "I'm tired of hiding, Charlotte," Walt said. "When are you going to tell him it's over?" "When the accounts are settled," she said sharply. "If I leave now, I get half of the house and the liquid assets. But if we wait another 6 months until the renovations are done, I'll have enough siphoned off to buy that condo in the city outright. Rodger won't even notice the missing cash. He'll just think inflation hit the construction industry." I turned off the device. I had heard enough. They weren't just having an affair, they were running a long con on my life's work. I spent the next 2 hours in the garage, but I wasn't moping. I was working on the smart part of the house. I opened the junction box for the guest suite's HVAC system. I didn't cut the wires. Instead, I installed a small, programmable logic controller, PLC. I programmed it with a very specific set of instructions. Whenever the humidity in the room exceeded 60%, the kind of humidity generated by two people in a small space or a hot shower, the AC would begin to cycle at 120% power for 30 seconds, then shut off completely for 10 minutes. It would create an unbearable rhythmic clicking sound, followed by a wave of stifling heat. Complexity, huh? I whispered, looking at the blinking green light on the PLC. Let's see how you handle a variable frequency drive with a mind of its own. I left the house before they came out, returning to my neighbor's driveway. I watched the van leave at 4 p.m. I waited another 30 minutes, then drove my truck up to the front door, whistling a tune. Charlotte was in the kitchen, fanning herself with a magazine. Rodger, thank God you're back. The AC in the guest wing is acting up again. It's making this horrible clicking noise, and it's boiling in there. Really? I asked, walking over to the thermostat. I checked the display, which I had remotely set to show system normal status regardless of the actual temperature. Looks fine to me, honey. Maybe it's just a ghost in the machine. Or maybe... I paused, looking her straight in the eye. The system is just rejecting a foreign object. She blinked, confused. What does that even mean? It's electrical jargon, I said, heading to the shower. It means someone is pulling more than the circuit can handle. The following morning, I decided to play the role of the clueless technician to perfection. I stood in the guest wing with a digital multimeter, poking at the vents while Charlotte watched from the doorway, her arms crossed. She looked tense. The ghosts I'd programmed into the system the night before had clearly kept her on edge. I don't get it, Rodger, she snapped. Walt was here yesterday checking the exterior units, and he said everything looked brand new. Then the moment he left, the whole wing started vibrating. Well, Walt's a generalist, isn't he? I said, emphasizing the word with just enough sarcasm to see her jaw tighten. He probably missed the harmonic resonance. If the load isn't balanced, the whole system starts to scream. It's basic physics, Charlotte. You can't force a high current through a narrow wire without generating heat. I wasn't just talking about electricity anymore, and for a second, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. But she brushed it off, retreating to her iPad to probably coordinate her next consultation with her lover. I headed to the basement. I knew where she kept the paper trail. Charlotte was smart, but she was a creature of habit. She believed that because I spent my life looking at blueprints and circuit diagrams, I wouldn't notice a physical folder hidden in a box labeled Tax Returns 2018. I found it tucked behind a stack of old magazines. It was a treasure trove of financial betrayal. Not only were there invoices from Walt's contracting, but there were also carbon copies of checks she'd written to herself from our joint equity line of credit. She was over-borrowing for house repairs that didn't exist and then depositing the change into a private account at a bank 3 towns over. But the most interesting find was a contract for a property management startup. The signatures on the bottom were Charlotte Vance and Walt Henderson. They weren't just sleeping together, they were building a business using my sweat equity as their seed money. I didn't take the folder. I didn't want her to know I'd breached her firewall yet. Instead, I used my phone to scan every single page. High-resolution, multi-page PDFs automatically backed up to a secure server. Then I noticed something on one of the invoices for the garden lighting project. It listed a specific model of high-end, architectural LED bollards, $600 apiece. I had seen the boxes in the garage. I walked over to the corner of the basement where the scrap was kept. The boxes were there, but they were empty. Or so I thought. I opened one and found the original packing slip. The items hadn't been installed, they had been returned. But the refund hadn't gone back to our credit card. The slip showed a store credit/cash refund for the full amount. Smart, I whispered. Buy the materials on the joint card, return them for cash, and tell the husband the wrong parts arrived. I headed back to my truck and called Hank, an old friend who specialized in forensic accounting for construction disputes. Rodger, you don't call unless someone's stealing copper or a subcontractor is padding the bill, Hank said, his voice gravelly. It's both, Hank. And it's closer to home, I said. I explained the scheme. I have the invoices, the returns, and the contract for their new business venture. I need to know how to freeze her out without triggering an alarm. If she's using joint funds to start a competing business or private venture without your consent, that's a breach of fiduciary duty in a marriage, Hank explained. But here's the kicker. If you can prove she's intentionally damaging the property or fabricating repairs, we can move for an exclusive use order. Basically, we kick her out while the legalities are sorted, and she gets nothing for the upgrades she claimed to have made. I want more than that, Hank. I want her to realize that she's been running on a battery that's finally hit 0%. Then we need to wait for the big one, Hank advised. Let her pull the trigger on that $4,500 sub-panel job. Once that money leaves your account and hits Walt's, we have a completed act of fraud. It's the smoking gun. I returned to the house and found Walt's van in the driveway again. I didn't stop. I pulled in right behind him, blocking him in. I walked into the kitchen. Walt was sitting at the island, drinking my expensive coffee, looking over some blueprints that were actually just sketches of a deck. Rodger. Hey man, Walt said, his voice a pitch too high. Just explaining to Charlotte why we need to expedite that electrical overhaul. It's getting dangerous. I bet it is, I said, leaning against the counter. I didn't look at Charlotte. I looked at Walt's tool belt. He had a brand new, top-of-the-line laser level clipped to his side. Nice level, Walt. Those are what, $400. Pricey for a handyman. A man is only as good as his tools, Walt said with a smug grin. Funny, I replied. I say a man is only as good as his word. And your words are starting to sound like a ground fault, a lot of noise, and no real connection. But hey, Charlotte says you're the expert. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to let you do that sub-panel. In fact, I'll write the check right now. Charlotte's eyes lit up. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd finally folded under the pressure of her safety concerns. I pulled out the checkbook and wrote a check for $4,500, payable to Walt's Contracting. I handed it to him. Do a good job, Walt, I said, patting him on the shoulder. Because I'm going to inspect every single wire. And I have a very low tolerance for resistance. As I walked away, I felt the circuit closing. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the surge. Watching Walt's hand shake slightly as he took that check was the most satisfying thing I'd seen all year. He tried to play it cool, tucking the paper into his pocket with a practiced shrug, but the sweat on his upper lip gave him away. He knew, on some primal level, that he was holding a live wire. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home. I didn't complain about the clicking AC. I didn't mention the repairs that never seemed to progress. Instead, I spent my evenings in the garage, ostensibly cleaning, but actually auditing every single digital footprint Charlotte left behind. She wasn't a technical genius. She relied on convenience. Our home router had a basic administration panel, no log files or complex hacking required, just a simple connected devices list. I noticed a recurring guest device, Walt's iPhone. But more importantly, I noticed that Charlotte was spending hours every night on a specific crypto exchange site. I didn't need to be a hacker to guess her password. It was the name of her first cat, and the year we got married, a combination I'd seen her use for everything from her email to the grocery app. I logged in from my laptop. There it was, a digital wallet glowing with the spoils of her embezzlement. Over $25,000 in various coins, all transferred in increments that matched the overpayments to Walt. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was building a portable, untraceable nest egg. Or so she thought. Rodger, you've been so quiet lately, Charlotte said on Wednesday evening. She was standing in the garage doorway, silhouetted by the house lights. She looked perfectly composed, the picture of a supportive wife. Is everything okay at the hotel site? Just a lot of troubleshooting, honey, I said, not looking up from a circuit board. I was pretending to solder. You find one leak, you find 10 more. It's all about tracing the source. Well, Walt is starting the sub-panel tomorrow morning, she said, her voice dropping to that sweet, manipulative tone she used when she wanted something. He'll need the power off for most of the day. Maybe you should stay at the office so you aren't distracted. Great idea, I said. I'll clear out. Tell Walt to take his time. I want it done perfectly. The next morning, as soon as the white van pulled into the driveway, I didn't go to the office. I went to the bank. I met with Brenda, a branch manager who had been a client of mine for a decade. I showed her the evidence of the contractor fraud and the unauthorized withdrawals from the equity line. Rodger, this is serious, Brenda whispered, looking at the scanned invoices. If she's using the joint account to pay for fraudulent services, I can flag the account for suspicious activity. It won't freeze it forever, but it will trigger a manual review of any large outgoing transfers. Do it, I said. And I want to open a separate, sole proprietorship account for my business. I'm transferring my portion of the liquid assets today. I've already consulted with Philip. It's all legal, moving my earned income into a protected business entity. While Brenda processed the paperwork, I sat in the lobby and opened my tablet. I had a live feed from a garage camera. Walt was standing in front of the main panel, looking at it like it was a foreign language. He had a screwdriver in one hand and a beer in the other. My beer. He wasn't installing a subpanel. He was just moving wires around to make it look busy. He was literally creating a mess so he could charge me for cleaning it up. I watched him lean over and whisper something to Charlotte, who was standing right behind him. She laughed and kissed him, a long, lingering kiss right in front of my high-voltage testers. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click like if you enjoy this story. I always read your comments and analyze which stories you like best so that I can create better stories. Thank you. I will continue the story. I felt a strange sense of calm. The betrayal was no longer an abstraction. It was a recorded event. I took a deep breath and sent a message to Philip. The surge is coming. Initiate the isolation protocol. By noon, I had successfully moved my share of the funds. My Project Ground Fault was no longer just a plan, it was an active circuit. I drove back to the house and parked around the corner. I pulled out my phone and accessed the Smart Home app. I hadn't disabled the lights, I had just remapped the commands. With one tap, I triggered a system test. Inside a house, every smart bulb began to strobe at 1% brightness, a ghostly, barely visible flicker. The smart speakers emitted a low-frequency hum, just at the edge of human hearing. It was the kind of environment that causes immediate, unexplained anxiety. I watched the garage feed. Walt jumped, dropping his screwdriver. "What the hell was that?" he yelled. "What's wrong?" Charlotte ran in, looking panicked. "The whole board just buzzed," Walt stammered. "I didn't even touch the main lugs yet. This place is cursed, Charlotte. Your husband's wiring is a nightmare. Just finish it, Walt. We need that money cleared before he checks the balance on Monday." I closed the app and put my phone away. They were desperate now. And desperate people make mistakes. They forget to check the grounding. They forget that in a house built by an electrician, every wall has ears and every wire leads back to me. By Friday, the atmosphere in the house was as thick as the air before a lightning strike. Charlotte was pacing, her phone glued to her hand. She hadn't realized yet that the suspicious activity flag Brenda placed on our account had stalled her latest transfer to her crypto wallet. To her, it just looked like a processing delay. To me, it was the sound of the trap door creaking shut. I came home early, carrying a heavy industrial case. I found Walt in the garage, staring at the main panel. He had actually managed to bolt a new, empty metal box to the wall, but there wasn't a single wire running into it. It was a $4,500 hollow shell. "How's the ancient wiring looking today, Walt?" I asked, my voice dripping with forced friendliness. Walt jumped, nearly knocking over his ladder. Hey Rodger. Yeah, it's complex. Lots of crosstalk in the circuits. I'm just, mapping out the phases." "Mapping the phases," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Good. Critical step. You wouldn't want to get your neutrals mixed up. That's how fires start." I opened my case, revealing a professional power quality analyzer. It looked like a ruggedized laptop with a dozen heavy-duty probes. "Mind if I run a load test while you're mapping? I want to see how the house handles a full draw." "Now," Charlotte asked, appearing in the doorway. Her face was pale. "Don't you need to rest, Rodger? You've been working so hard." "Energy is my rest, Charlotte," I said, a thin smile on my face. I began clipping the heavy probes onto the main bus bars. Walt backed away, his eyes wide. He knew enough to know that if he touched those bars while I was measuring, he'd be vaporized. I started the test. The machine began to hum, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that resonated through the concrete floor. On the screen, a graph appeared. It showed the power consumption of every major appliance in the house. I pointed to a specific spike on Tuesday afternoon. "Look at that, Walt," I said, turning the screen toward him. "A massive draw on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Exactly 4.2 kilowatts. That's the master suite AC and the espresso machine. Strange, right?" Charlotte told me she was at the gallery all day and the house was empty. Walt looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at the floor. "Must have been a power surge from the grid," Walt stammered. "A surge that makes a double-shot latte? That's some high-tech grid you've got there, Walt," I remarked dryly. I let the silence hang for a moment, heavy and suffocating. "Anyway, I'm running a full-load simulation now. It's going to stress the system. If there's a weak point, a bad connection, a fraudulent repair, or a leak in the budget, this machine will find it. I turned a dial on the analyzer. In the house, the lights brightened to their maximum intensity, then dimmed to a faint orange glow. The smart fridge began to beep. The speakers emitted a sharp, high-pitched crackle. "Rodger, stop it. You're going to break something." Charlotte shouted, her composure finally cracking. "I'm not breaking it, Charlotte. I'm testing the integrity of the circuit," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper. "If the system is built on a solid foundation, it will survive. If it's built on lies and cheap extension cords buried in the dirt, well, the breaker is going to trip." I turned the dial one more notch. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed from the patio. The new garden lighting Walt had installed had shorted out, exactly as I knew it would under a real load. A small wisp of smoke drifted past the window. "Looks like your handyman work just failed the test, Walt," I said, looking him dead in the eye. Walt didn't say a word. He grabbed his half-empty beer, shoved his screwdriver into his belt, and practically ran to his van. I'll come back when the interference is cleared," he yelled over his shoulder as he peeled out of the driveway, tires screaming. Charlotte stood in the garage, staring at the empty space where the van had been. She looked at me, then at the glowing, buzzing machine in my hands. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I just performed an audit, Charlotte," I said, calmly unhooking the probes. "And the results are in. You're over budget, underpowered, and completely disconnected. Why don't you go inside and check your bank account? I think you'll find that the processing delay just became permanent." I walked past her, the heavy case in my hand, leaving her in the darkening garage. The power wasn't out, but for Charlotte, the lights were finally starting to go dim. The silence in the house after Walt's departure was more deafening than the industrial hum of my analyzer. Charlotte didn't follow me inside immediately. She stayed in the garage for a long time, likely trying to call Walt, only to find that his contractor phone was probably already at the bottom of a canal or switched off. When she finally entered the kitchen, she didn't look like the poised, gallery-owning muse I had married. She looked like a calculated risk that had just gone south. She was staring at her phone, her thumb frantically refreshing her banking app. "Rodger, there's a mistake," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. "I tried to pay the gardener, and my card was declined. Then I checked the Equi line. It says, account under review." "What did you tell them?" I was sitting at the kitchen table, methodically cleaning the lenses of my thermal camera with a microfiber cloth. "I didn't tell them anything they didn't already see, Charlotte. When a bank sees a sudden outflow of funds to a contracting company that isn't registered with the Better Business Bureau and has zero tax history, they get nervous. It's called fraud prevention. You should be thanking them." "Fraud," she spat the word out. "I was fixing our home. I was trying to make this place worth something." "Actually," I said, looking up, "you were devaluing it. That mess Walt buried in the garden? It's a code violation. The sub-panel in the garage? It's an empty box. You didn't invest in the house, Charlotte. You invested in a getaway driver. But unfortunately for you, your driver just realized the bridge is out." I pulled a thick envelope from my laptop bag and slid it across the marble countertop. It didn't contain photos of her in bed. It contained spreadsheets. "That's a line-by-line audit of every dollar that has left our joint accounts in the last 6 months," I explained, "matched against the actual market value of the repairs. The discrepancy is roughly $32,000, not including the $25,000 you've been funneling into that Kraken crypto account." She froze. The mention of the crypto wallet was the final blow to her clueless wife defense. How long have you known?" she whispered, the silk robe she wore looking suddenly like a cheap costume. "Since the coffee machine started making 2 lattes on Tuesdays," I said. "You see, Charlotte, you forgot the most basic rule of electricity. Everything leaves a trace. You thought you were being subtle, but you were drawing so much current that the wires were glowing. I just had to follow the heat." I stood up and walked to the main hallway. I tapped a command into the wall-mounted tablet. "I've already spoken to the insurance company," I continued. "I told them about the unauthorized electrical work performed by an unlicensed individual. They've suspended the policy coverage for the guest wing until a certified inspection is completed. And since the house is technically a hazard now, my lawyer Philip has filed for an emergency temporary injunction." "An injunction? It means you have 48 hours to vacate the premises while the dangerous conditions are remediated," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. Since you've been using marital assets to fund a private business venture with Mr. Henderson, the court has frozen the local accounts to determine what's left of the marital estate. Charlotte's face twisted. She wasn't crying, she was calculating. You think you're so smart. You think you can just flip a switch and I disappear? I'll tell the court you're controlling, that you've been spying on me, that you've created a hostile environment with your gadgets. Go ahead, I shrugged. But the judge will be looking at a man who protected his home from a fraudulent contractor and a woman who tried to embezzle her way to Santorini. In my world, the one with the best grounding wins. And right now, Charlotte, you're floating. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air rushed in. Walt isn't coming back, by the way, I added sarcastically. I sent him a copy of the thermal photos of the guest room mattress. I told him that as a professional courtesy, I wouldn't report his unlicensed work to the state board if he provided a full, written confession of the kickback scheme he ran with you. He emailed it to Philip 20 minutes ago. He's very protective of his van and his brand new laser level. Charlotte sank into a chair, her phone slipping from her hand onto the floor. For the first time, she looked at me and didn't see a technician. She saw the man who owned the grid. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled deconstruction. Charlotte didn't scream or throw vases. That would have required energy she no longer possessed. She moved through the house like a ghost in a fading circuit. I stayed in my workshop, watching the house's telemetry. Every time she tried to log into our shared Amazon account to order luggage, the screen flashed, access denied. Every time she picked up the house phone, there was no dial tone. I hadn't cut the lines, I had simply redirected the traffic. Rodger, please, she said, standing at the workshop door on the final evening. I need money for a hotel. My personal cards are blocked. You can't just leave me with nothing. You have the crypto, Charlotte, I said, not looking up from my schematics. Oh wait, I forgot. Since that wallet was funded with embezzled marital assets, Philip filed a Mariva injunction. The exchange has locked the account pending a digital audit. You're not broke, you're just high impedance. I handed her a small, prepaid debit card. There's $500 on there. Enough for a week at a motel, and some cab rides to your lawyer's office. Consider it a rebate for all the coffee Walt drank. She took the card, her fingers trembling. The cold reality of her situation was finally sinking in. In the world of high-voltage engineering, there is no room for almost. You are either connected or you are isolated. She was now a dead wire. Part 9, the final inspection. The day of the move-out was overcast and gray. A small moving truck sat in the driveway. Charlotte didn't have much, mostly clothes and some personal items. Everything of value in the house had been meticulously cataloged and secured as part of the legal proceedings. As she walked toward the door, I met her in the foyer. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is a waste of potential energy. I felt nothing but the satisfaction of a job correctly finished. One last thing, I said, handing her a final envelope. This is a copy of the report from the city electrical inspector. He visited this morning while you were packing. What for? She asked, her voice hollow. He officially condemned the patio and the guest wing repairs as a public safety hazard. The cost to bring the house back to code is exactly $32,000. The court has already agreed to deduct that amount from your share of the property settlement. She stared at the paper. The exact amount she had siphoned. The math was perfect. The system had balanced itself. You're a monster, she whispered. No, Charlotte, I replied, opening the front door for her one last time. I'm an electrician. I just made sure the current went exactly where it was supposed to go. Part 10, Zero Potential. 6 months later, the house was silent and perfectly tuned. I sat on the patio, the one I had rebuilt myself, with proper conduit and weather-rated LED fixtures that cast a clean, warm glow over the garden. I checked my tablet. The power consumption was a steady, beautiful baseline. No spikes, no surges, no phantom loads. Walt had vanished from the state, his contracting business liquidated to pay the fines I'd helped the city level against him. Charlotte was living in a small apartment in the city, working as a junior clerk at a gallery she used to own. She wasn't broken or worn down. She was simply an outsider, a person who had tried to bypass the meter and got caught in the sparks. I took a sip of my coffee, a single latte, perfectly brewed. The motion sensors on the driveway triggered, notifying me of the mailman's arrival. I smiled. It was a good feeling knowing that every light in my life was finally under my control. Thank you for watching this video. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new, interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. The screen now displays a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.